You've gone through an interview process, multiple rounds. You think maybe you'll get an offer, but instead you're told that they have hired an internal candidate. And you're thinking, well, that was just a big waste of time. Yeah, they're going to go with the internal candidate. So I'm going to talk about when you might be what we would call a benchmark candidate. I want you to know how you can actually figure this out and what you can do about it. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Now, I was a recruiter for many years, and in my last job, we had a rule that if there was an internal candidate that had been, decided that that could be a good person for the job, we still had to post the job externally. I had to post it for 3 days. And we would start the process with the internal person, but I would look at candidates, and if there are any that met the requirements of the job, they would move forward in the interview process. But I can tell you that except for one time that I remember in all my years, we always went with the internal candidate. And the problem is for the external candidate is that they can be a really good qualified person, but organizations want to go with internal candidates. They are less risk. And so it's important to know that this process is actually stacked against you as an external candidate. And so I want to tell you how you can identify potentially that this is a benchmark position for anyone who's external and what you might be able to do about it. So first we're going to talk about job descriptions and postings because there could be some clues that they have an internal candidate, but you got to be able to pick up on them. So I have 4 of them that are potentially clues. Now I will tell you that one alone may not be a signal, but if you see 2 or more of these, then maybe there's something going on there that you need to investigate more. So the first one is a job description that is very specific. It is as if it is written for a specific person. And that's because you might have in it, a title, but you're going to have within it just really niche type of skills or expertise that someone normally would not have for that title. It's almost like, it's a needle in a haystack. Well, that's maybe because they have that needle and they're writing that description for that person. So be aware of that. Now, the opposite can happen as well. And that is a job description that is so vague. You're like, what is this job even about? It may not even have a title for it. It may have vague job duties. And so it's really hard to get your arms around what this person would do. Well, that could be a sign that they're not putting any effort into really looking for anybody. Putting together a job description means you have to think about the job. But if you have somebody you've already identified internally, you might go, well, why bother with that? And so they just put something out there, but it really has no meaning because they don't need it to have one. So that's a signal. A third signal could be when the job is not really being pushed. So especially if you are aware of jobs within that organization and you see recruiters posting about the job, you see hiring teams posting about the job, you see, activity by maybe some agency recruiters, something like that, then they're actively looking for people. But if this particular job has none of that activity, yeah, that could be a signal that they've already identified someone internally. And then the 4th signal, which is what I talked about in my particular situation, is that we would open that job for 3 days and then close it. That was not normal for most of the positions. They would be up, 30 days or so. So when something opens really quickly and then you see it gone, that can be a signal as well. Now, as I said, each one of these on its own may not mean anything, but if you see a group of these kind of signals, yeah, I would be wary because you might not want to spend your time on a job that you are unlikely to get. If you enjoy this information, I would really appreciate hitting that like button and subscribe to my channel. It really helps. I'll admit, sometimes it's hard to know if you're a benchmark candidate from a job posting. It's really when you get into the interview process that you start picking up on some signals. So I'm going to talk about what you should be aware of that could be an indication that you are this benchmark candidate and they actually are going to go with somebody internal. So one of the signals that you'll get is that the interviews seem kind of performative, meaning you are doing well in terms of answering the questions, but there's not follow up. There's not interest in knowing more. It's almost like they ask the question and they're checking the box and just moving on. That can be a signal that, yeah, you know what? They're just doing this as an exercise and they're not really that interested. So be aware of that. Another signal is that you aren't meeting the right people in the interview process. And what I mean by that is when it is a real exercise of trying to find the right person, they will want you to meet with important stakeholders, people that are going to be important in the decision making. But if you are not being scheduled with those people, if you're being scheduled with people that, yeah, it's nice that they get to meet you, but that they're not the people that are going to make the decision, that can be an indication that you are one of these benchmark candidates because they just are going through the process and they don't want to take the stakeholders' time to interview you. Another, signal can be if they are not trying to sell you on the role. Now, what happens when it's a competitive position is when they've identified somebody, they often give clues, and that is trying to really sell you that this is a great opportunity for you. And you'll hear that from the recruiter, you'll hear that from the hiring manager. But if you aren't getting that vibe, if they're not doing anything of that sort, then that can be a signal as well. Another signal that kind of is in the same vein as not selling you is if they are not asking you about your timeline. So if they were very interested in you, they may ask you about whether you have, other interests. How quickly are you looking to find a job? Do you have anything in the pipeline? Things like that. If they don't seem to be particularly interested in that, that could be a sign that, yeah, whatever you do is fine because they already have decided on who they want. Okay, so you're getting the vibe that something is going on here. Well, then the question is, what do you do? So there's a few things that you can do. And, it's really going to be up to you and your investment and your interests. But one of the things you definitely can do is ask. Ask if they have any internal candidates. That's important, and that might be something that you want to do just as part of the questions that you ask the recruiter or even the hiring manager. Because if they say that they do, then that gives you an idea of the possibility of you getting this job. Now, doesn't mean that they always will hire the internal person, but there's a good chance they will. And so that will help you decide how much investment you want to make in this process, because as a job seeker, you only have so much time. You only have so much energy. So if you feel like you are not going to get the offer, if you've gotten any of these signs, even through the interview process, then it's, perfectly okay for you to decide to withdraw from the process and put your energies in another direction. I wouldn't have any issue with any of my clients who decide that based on the information that they're getting, because, why bother potentially if there is no positive result from this? So that's an option that you can take. Now, some people think, especially if it's an organization that they are very interested in working with at some point, that they will invest the time, even if there is an internal candidate, because they'll be able to build relationships. Obviously, they can show that their abilities are something that the organization would, value, and that can lead to something, if not now, then in the future. So there are some people that take that tack, and there's nothing wrong with that either. You just have to decide, your motivations and what makes sense for you. But I think an important part of this discovery is that this was stacked against you. It was actually a process where you weren't really ever going to be a part of that decision making. So you cannot internalize that you failed because you didn't fail. This was stacked against you from the beginning and you weren't aware of it. But, now that you pick up the signs, you now can make more informed decisions about what to do next. If you come across the situation, how you might want to handle that. That's important. But no, you didn't fail. You just were part of a process that was not meant for you to succeed. The important takeaway here is not every interview process is fair. And what you should do is be a smart job seeker and know the signs so that when something like this may be happening, you'll know how to maneuver through that, what questions to ask, what information you're getting that will help you to decide what you should do. That is being strategic. If you need help preparing for an interview, I have my rapid response interview prep information in the description. Go take a look.